Hey everybody, and welcome to a video on absolute value. So without further ado, let's make it happen. So what is the absolute value of a number? Absolute value is a measure of how big a number it is, or a number's magnitude, without regard to whether that number is positive or negative. So for example, negative 1200. It's a really big number. So is positive 1200. It doesn't matter whether it's positive or negative, those are big numbers. Those are going to have large absolute values. 2 is a pretty small number. So is negative 2. Doesn't matter whether it's positive or negative, they're going to have small absolute values. But here's the definition I like to use. The absolute value of a number is that number's distance from 0 on the real number line. So if we look at a number line and think about our last examples, 1200 and negative 1200 are both really far away from 0 on the number line. So they're going to have really big absolute values. Those are big numbers. It doesn't matter whether you're positive or negative on the right-hand side of the number line or the left-hand side of the number line. If you're far away from 0, if you're a big number, you're going to have a big absolute value. 2 and negative 2 are both pretty close to 0. They're small numbers. They have a small absolute value. Again, doesn't matter whether you're positive or negative on the right-hand side of the number line or the left-hand side of the number line. And the way that we denote or write the absolute value of a number is with 2 vertical bars on either side of the number. So for example, to write the absolute value of W, we'd write it this way. And below you see the absolute value of 5, the absolute value of 3, etc., etc. So let's look at these 4 examples, starting with the absolute value of 5. Well, what is the absolute value of 5? We've got to figure out how far 5 away is from 0 on the real number line. Well, it looks to me like 5 is 5 units away from 0 on the real number line. So we'd say the absolute value of 5 is 5. Similarly, for 3 is 3 units away from 0 on the real number line. So the absolute value of 3 is 3. Same thing with 10. 10 is going to be exactly 10 units away from 0 on the real number line. So the absolute value of 10 is 10. The absolute value of 0, well, how far away is 0 from 0 on the real number line? Well, 0 is right on top of 0. It's 0 units away, so the absolute value of 0 is 0. And perhaps we're starting to see a trend. And in general, the absolute value of any non-negative number is just going to be itself. The absolute value of 27 is 27. The absolute value of 300 is 300. The absolute value of 13/8 is 13/8. What about the absolute value of negative numbers? Same strategy, just got to figure out how far away from 0 on the real number line are they. So, to find the absolute value of negative 5, well, looks to me like negative 5 is exactly 5 units away from 0. So the absolute value of negative 5 is 5. What about negative 3? Same strategy there. Looks to me like negative 3 is exactly 3 units away from 0, so negative 3 has an absolute value of 3. Same thing with negative 10. Negative 10 is exactly 10 units away from 0, so its absolute value is going to be 10. And perhaps you found a pattern here as well. And what happens is, for any negative number, its absolute value is just going to be its additive inverse, or the positive version of that number. Because of course, negative 3 is exactly 3 units away from 0. Negative 5 is 5 units from 0. Negative 10 is 10 units from 0. Negative 29 is 29 units from 0. Negative 376 is 376 units away from 0. And perhaps you've also noticed that any 2 numbers that are additive inverses of one another will always have the same absolute value. So negative 5 has the same absolute value as positive 5. Negative 3 has the same absolute value as positive 3. Negative 10 has the same absolute value as positive 10, etc., etc. So while so far we've discussed absolute value every time looking at a number line, I'm sure at this point we can compute the absolute value of these 4 numbers on our own. So why don't you pause the video for a moment, give these 4 a try, and when you're done, go ahead and unpause and see how it went. As we can see, every time we're taking the absolute value of a non-negative number, we end up with that number itself. Every time we take the absolute value of a negative number, we end up with its additive inverse, or the positive version of that number. But even so, I'd always like us to consider and visualize a number line when doing these problems. One little stylistic comment: whenever you're writing absolute value on your own, please do whatever you need to make sure that it's obvious that that vertical line is an absolute value and not, for instance, the number 1. It could get really confusing to a reader, so just something to keep in mind. One other thing that you may have noticed is that the absolute value of a number can never be negative. If we've defined the absolute value of a number to be its distance from 0 on the number line, of course a distance can't be negative. You can't have a negative distance, so it's impossible to take the absolute value of a number and get a negative number. The absolute value will be at least 0 or positive all the time. One other thing to keep in mind is if you're ever taking the absolute value of something, but there's some operations going on within the absolute value, in general, simplify everything in the absolute value symbols first before taking the absolute value. And with regard to the order of operations, the absolute value symbols can be thought of as similar to parentheses when you're thinking about the order of operations. So in this case, with the absolute value of negative 9 minus 7, we're going to want to actually take care of that subtraction, get negative 16, and then take the absolute value of that, which is 16. Be careful, this would not be equal to the absolute value of negative 9 minus the absolute value of 7. Maybe that didn't seem tempting to you, but some students get caught up by that mistake. So remember, please take care of everything within the absolute value bars first, of course paying attention to order of operations before you take the absolute value of that number. So down here I've got 3 more examples for you to try on your own. So once again, please pause the video now, give these 3 a try, and when you're done, please play the video to see how it went. Alright, so I really hope those went well for you. Hey again, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you found it helpful.